안녕하십니까? 제17회 제주 포럼에 참석해 주신 여러분 반갑습니다. 지금부터 공존과 협력의 남북관계 패러다임 모색 세션을 시작하겠습니다. 본 행사는 동시통역이 제공되며 통역을 원하시는 분들께서는 자리에 놓여 있는 수신기를 착용하시기 바랍니다. 한국어 채널은 1번, 영어는 2번입니다. 감사합니다. 세션의 진행을 맡아주실 좌장님을 소개해 드리겠습니다. 좌장님은 통일연구원 김상기 통일정책연구실장님입니다. 김상기 실장님께서는 통일연구원 통일정책연구실의 실장님을 맡고 계시며 남북관계, 북미관계, 한반도 평화체제 등을 주로 연구하고 계십니다.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 17th Jeju Forum. Thank you for joining us today for Seeking a Paradigm for Inter-Korean Relations of Coexistence and Cooperation. Simultaneous interpretation is available for this session. For service in Korean, set your device on channel 1. For English, select channel 2. Now, I would like to hand over the stage to Kim Sang-ki, who will moderate this session. Everyone, please welcome the moderator.
안녕하세요.
Good afternoon. My name is Kim Sang-gi. I am from Korea Institute for National Unification. I'm a director of Unification Policy. Today's session has a theme called Seeking a Paradigm for Inter-Korean Relations of Coexistence and Cooperation. We do not have a favorable relationship with North Korea, and it has been little over 3 years since we disconnected our dialogue between the two heads of states, and this is the longest time recently that the head of the state from the south and the north haven't talked to each other. And this illustrates where we are now in terms of the inter-Korean relation. That is why our theme, Seeking a Paradigm for Inter-Korean Relations of Coexistence and Cooperation, is furthermore meaningful and timely. I would like to introduce our speakers and panel discussants. We have 2 presenters followed by 4 panelists. First presenter is Professor Jung Jae-young from Fudan University. Major interest is the military issue and inter-Korean relation. Second presenter is a research fellow, Lee Mu-chol. He's highly interested in the politics and economy in North Korea and unification policies. We have 4 discussants. Number 1 is Professor Lee Woo-young from University of North Korean Studies. He has been a chairman of the North Korean studies, and he's highly interested in the society and culture of North Korea. Second panelist is the chief research fellow of Lee Ki-dong from Institute for National Security Strategy. He is the current chairman of the North Korean Studies Association. Panelist third is senior research professor Kim Gap-sik. He's highly interested in unification policies and North Korean politics. And last panelist is the research fellow Jang Chol-un, and his major focus is Korean Peninsula's security issues, including North Korea's missiles. Without further ado, let us begin our presentations. We have 15 minutes each for the presenters, and we allocated 7 minutes each for panelists. We now have broadcasting online on the YouTube, so please make sure to keep your time for your presentation and discussion. Let me first introduce the first presenter, Professor Jung Jae-young.
북한의 국제적
He will talk about North Korea's recent perception of the international situation and prospects for South Korea policy. Professor Zhang, please go on. Thank you very much. And it's a great honor to be here, to be invited here at such a meaningful forum. And again, I want to thank the moderator. And my subject here is, again, North Korea's recent perception of the international situation and prospects for South Korean policy. So, as you're well aware, nowadays, the inter-Korean relations are not in a favorable situations, and the global situation is fast changing, and so it is again not a favorable situation. So we're all interested in what's happening in North Korea and the global perception. So I will talk about four things today. The first is the Yoon Suk-yeol government and the Korean Peninsula in upheaval. So I will talk about the surroundings of Korea
한국은 지금
and some trends. So Korea, after the Yoon Suk-yeol government took place, and it's been quite some time there, and there's been some turbulences here, and there's been some changes in the Korean Peninsula as well. And there is Korea, China, and U.S. relations. So the Sino-Korea relations play an important role among them, and there's again the Russia-Ukraine relations as well. So there's a multilateral situation related, and against this backdrop, we have to think about the Sino-Korea relations and other bilateral relations as well. So we also have to think about how we can solve this issue. So Korea, when it comes to Korea, from the China perspective, the Yoon government has made a serious strategic misjudgment from a China point of view. So the Korea-China relations, we started to see cracks because Korea demands respect and equality from a China point of view. And actually, as U.S. wants to take the lead in a new global situation, and U.S. wants Korea to join. And again, there are a lot of things related. For example, Chip 4. So the Korea-China relations are getting worse. So again, I believe that the Korea-China relations will have a lot of changes in the future. So China has a lot of expectations towards Korea. But those expectations has declined a lot because when it comes to Chinese perspective, it will act more aggressively towards Korea. Second, I want to call this strategic ventures of Korea. Korea is doing that again. And Korea's ties with the US are actually wants to take against China. So all these gestures and these NATO movements, so all these movements will make China react to that. So if in the Sea of Taiwan and the South China Sea, there might be military movements, and we'll have to see what happens in the future. And North Korea, again, is taking ventures. So North Korea is using various means and to confront against Korea, and is confronting Korea in a lot of sea territories, and actually, DPRK wants to have ties with North Korea, China, and Russia, so that can be called as a triangle. And another thing is that opportunism is like evident in the Korean peninsula. So that can be seen something similar to the end of the 19th century during the Joseon dynasty, the internal party conflict. So the Korea wants to constantly attract foreign powers, and that back then led to the destruction of the Korean Empire. So that might be called some deterioration of the Korean peninsula. So personally, I think that the North Korea's fate is at stake. So China will, again, like I mentioned, will react to that movement. So North Korea, relatively speaking, they are taking a clear stance. So just like Korea, they are playing Go of the global Go, I would say. But actually, North Korea is taking a dual status as a knight plus ghost stone. So maybe that is comparable to the Cold War times, and they restore the superiority of the North Triangle strategy. So actually, I believe North Korea is judging that the time has come to lead that North Korea-China relations. The second thing I want to mention is that the Kim Jong-un regime used to have this our nation firstism. But if they mention that, I believe that they want to include Republic of Korea as well. But then that has transformed into North-only firstism, so that it can be called as our nation firstism. So that nation, so that people, nation has replaced the word people. So maybe North Korea wants to go separate ways with Republic of Korea as well. So another important thing is that back in May, North Korea again declared themselves as a nuclear country. So they wanted to upgrade themselves as a nuclear weapon state. So we still don't know where they would be headed. So I believe again that the Korean Peninsula is in stake. Second is a change of North Korea. Actually, what Kim Jong-un did this year, this year marks the 10th year of Kim Jong-un's regime. So they successfully stabilized the state policy and foreign policy again. And as now North Korea has more tools than ever, they want to secure their global status. And if we look at their nuclear strategy and their declaration as a nuclear weapon state, we have to focus on these movements as well. And there are some peculiarity of the North Korea. And because of the COVID virus, North Korea has locked themselves inside. So they have some difficult status as well. And again, there are sanctions against North Korea, but I would say that they are quite get used to it. And they are again getting used to this close situation. So now North Korea is trying to break that. So in the future, with combined with the nuclear status of North Korea, we'll have to think about where we are headed and how we can do in the future. Third issue is North Korea's external perception. I can mention a few things here. The expanding rift of Sino-US relations. So there is a deterioration between the two countries, US and China. And what North Korea can do. So think about back in 2018. So maybe, again, just like in 2018, North Korea does not want anything from Republic of Korea. So maybe
만약에 협력 분야
if this trend continues, maybe there might be some economic issues as well. So if there can be any cooperation between China and US, then that would be the nuclear situation of North Korea and the solution of the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula. But if the North Korea is thinking about this cooperation, these two countries, US and China, maybe they can use this situation to expand their external perception as well. And then North Korea can support China and support Russia as well. That would be further deteriorating the China and US ties. So again, whatever the North Korea might do, if they continue the nuclear testings, then maybe, but there won't be any proper punishment in the future. That is what North Korea wants. And in the Korean Peninsula, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration is in Korea right now. And the North Korea wants to amplify the uncertainty between Korea and China. So North Korea rapidly reduced South Korea's role as an intermediary between North Korea and the US, and North Korea expanded their status for dialogue between North Korea and China. And again, the Yoon Suk-yeol administrations are doing some conservative tendency compared to Moon Jae-in administration. But because of that, North Korea does not care anymore about the Korean people. Now they are only talking about the North Korean state. And again, that is the road that North Korea is taking right now because of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. And again, in terms of homogeneity, they expanded their space of North Korea. Because of the COVID virus, China needs other countries' empathy. And like Russia, seeking to be morally recognized in the Ukrainian crisis, China is also seeking for recognition. So maybe I think that goes back to the Cold War era, because at that time the USSR wanted that recognition in the past. So that is what North Korea is willing to provide to China and Russia. So again, that is a political shield of North Korea, I would say. And again, a major reason for that was the COVID-19 virus. And again, like because of the sanction has continued for such a long time, we cannot do any more sanctions for that. Because they can now completely evade sanctions and has learned how to survive the sanctions. And North Korea also understands it well. And because of this, North Korea thinks that they can actively do something right now. So that Go board I mentioned is actually expanding to the world, and North Korea again wants to actively go to the world. So the North Korean nuclear issue is a regular issue. It's not a special issue anymore. So the nuclear issue should no longer be the subject of discussion because they have already declared them as a nuclear power state. And lastly, the North Korea's current policies and their actions. I will briefly touch upon this. So in the midst of such strategic recognition and limitations, I believe North Korea has already taken the lead in relations with China, the US, and South Korea. And again, because of the COVID virus outbreak, the sanction has lost its meaning in many ways. And again, like I mentioned, North Korea is learning how to react. And the global institutions are not acting as intended. They are quite being neutralized. And China, again, cannot act as a sanctioned country for North Korea anymore. And North Korea, again, thinks that all those sanctions means nothing now. So China and Russia will keep confronting the US and will seek help from North Korea, and they will not react to North Korean policies. Rather, China and Russia will try to collaborate with North Korea to confront US. So again, I believe that North Korea will be out of their leash right now. And given the situation, they have shifted from diplomatic with US and hostile with the South, or diplomatic with South and hostile with US. They changed their tactics to diplomatic with China and Russia and hostile with the South and US. They will try to isolate the US and increase the cost for actions. They will put more pressure to the US in the future. On the other hand, they will try to block South Korea too. And North Korea will make Korea pay for the failure of inter-Korean military agreements. And they will try to create a new agenda in the Korean Peninsula. And that nuclear issue would not be a major player in the Korean Peninsula, and that is something they would do in the future. So North Korea has rapidly weakened its organization in the South, and actually they're intensifying the reach on China-US relations. So there is a high possibility of a crisis in the Korean Peninsula, and again, that chance is increasing. And again, North Korea used to create this North Korean crisis in the past. They have changed their strategy, and they will use these US-China competition, these international crises. So that is a strategy that parallels the Korean Peninsula crisis. So again, they would want to rebuild this triangle from the past. And in conclusion, again, there will be unprecedented situations and crises in the Korean Peninsula. And again, in these US-China relation crisis, there will be a more unprecedented crisis in the Korean Peninsula. And more than that, the type of crisis will change from what it was before, from security situations. But in the future, again, it would be very hard to forecast these crises. Maybe preventing military crisis, there would be new types of management crisis management. So we will think about how we can take control over the Korean Peninsula. So that is something we have to think in the future. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.
예, 정계영 교수님 발표 감사드립니다.
Thank you, Professor Chung. In China at the moment, they thought about Korean policies in a certain ways, and that was a good opportunity that we listened to Professor Chung with a lot of details and insightful information. In particular, North Korea is proceeding with its triangular policy, and Professor Chung emphasized that we have to keep an eye on that. Next, Professor Lee Mu-chul will talk about the post-COVID inter-Korean relations. Doctor, please. Good afternoon. My name is Lee Mu-chul from Korea Institute for the Reunification, and my topic is seeking a paradigm for a new inter-Korean relations in the post-COVID-19 era. Before I begin, why we need a new paradigm for the inter-Korean relations after the COVID-19. And we also have to think how COVID-19 has impacted on inter-Korean relations. As everyone is well aware, COVID-19 has a great impact on everyone's daily life. In the past, the paradigm between the inter-Korean relations was highly influenced by some nationalism and certain philosophy. However, COVID-19 has greatly influenced, and in the course of recovering from COVID-19, we had some issues arise. And nationalism led us to failure of the efficient responses to COVID-19. So regarding security, COVID-19 has become a new type of threat. Before COVID-19, of course, we had some thoughts about some external factors that impact on inter-Korean relations. And due to COVID-19, we started to think about non-traditional security, human security, and emerging security. And now we started to feel more importance and necessity of the linkage between the national security and human security. Then where are we now on the Korean Peninsula? As the moderator mentioned, that we are not in a favorable situation regarding the inter-Korean relations. And that impacts not only on South Korea, but North Korea. And I believe it goes the same to both Koreas. We are approaching the unconventional security issues in the traditional framework, and that's the most serious part that we have. Of course, the conventional security elements are some things that we have to prioritize. However, we also have to consider the unconventional security factors. In the meantime, North Korea has been refusing any collaboration and cooperation and support provided by South Korea regarding COVID-19 issues. We may have different tools and means, however, North Korea wants to realize the unification by violence and by nuclear weapons, and in that way, we are on different tracks. But we do want the peace and prosperity in our own context. And while we maintain our own view on unification, we cannot solve any issues from dilemma in security and unconventional security issues that could be a future and the current crisis. So today I want to suggest that we need to establish a new awareness and the paradigm of inter-Korean relations to prepare for the post-COVID era. After going beyond our previous perspective centered around the national security, now we can think of why we need a new paradigm for the inter-Korean relations from outside the Korea. And inside South Korea, we do have some awareness changes. In my institute, we have had the series of a survey, and according to that survey, we had two different types of groups who prefer unification and who do not prefer unification. So there are less and less people who prefer unification. Rather, they want to remain peaceful, but in our own ways, in both Koreas. And there has been a gap deepening between these two groups. So according to this survey, when they answer that they want to keep the two Koreas in a peaceful manner, they mean that they do not want a war, but they still want the two regimes on the same peninsula. In South Korea, we are going through rapid changes in informatization, and we have now new generations emerge, and we do have some social changes, including multiculturalism. How about North Korea? Their discourse has been changed. As the Professor Chung mentioned, North Korea used to emphasize the nationalism, and it was always nation first. But if you look at the social and cultural changes inside the North Korea, people prefer practical perspectives and manners. After 2000, there have been a series of the Inter-Korean Summit, and after that, North Korea's atmosphere has changed. I met a few defectors, and the older generations of defectors actually wish that North Korea realized the unification by nuclear weapons. But now, younger generations and the recent trend emphasizes peace first and unification next. So based on this information and circumstances, now we have to be more critical to evaluate the awareness of the existing inter-Korean relations. And I believe it is not easy to suggest an answer for all. Then my next question is that whether national security policy could be a good tool. Well, both Koreas have never given up on their goals to establish a unified nation. And both Koreas have the national security centered point of view. Also, if you think of a progressive and the conservative parties, they both want the peaceful unification based on this strong security framework. And that means that we first form a certain unified organization, and after reconciliation, we can realize the genuine reunification. So methods are different from both Koreas. However, both Koreas want to have the peaceful Korea in an ultimate way. Then is this method fit for the current situation? That's the question we have to review. Both Koreas used to be favorable for peace first and unification later, but within their own society, they have some conflicts and social disagreement. So to seek a new paradigm for inter-Korean relations, I do want to suggest a concept called the biotic community. So this concept of biotic community came from the environmental aspect of the society, and maybe we can expand the concept and then by combining ecology and spirit of a community can suggest a new concept of a biotic community. And that means that we can include the entire ecosystem going beyond the human society only. Former President Moon mentioned a concept called the community for life, but that's the English translation of the former president's comment. However, I believe that my suggestion of a concept is slightly different from community for life. So to use such a new concept, we need to combine the environmental ethic that is human-based, and also we need to combine that with environmental ethic that is centered around ecology and ecosystem. So there should be Korean citizens from both Koreas to create a biotic community. And that means that we can expand the issues of life and safety of people on the Korean Peninsula as the ecological issues of the Korean Peninsula. And that includes the every aspect of the society, including politics, military, society, economy, culture, health, public health, and energy. And that my suggestion is to discuss this harmony in the framework of the ecology on the Korean Peninsula. So when I say to form a biotic community on the Korean Peninsula, that means that we need to have an ecological perspective approach regarding life and safety of human beings. However, in the meantime, that also means that we can include a new concept within the biotic community concept. That means that we can go beyond the ecology on the Korean Peninsula and we can create a new model for harmonization of the people on the Korean Peninsula. Then how can we create this biotic community on the Korean Peninsula? And once again, we have to think of the expansion of this concept. So by doing so, we should be able to create the biotic community on the Korean Peninsula. And all the concerns that we have should be shared with Korean counterparts. And by sharing our thoughts with them, and that will be the first step to create this biotic community and expand this concept. Because we both share conventional and unconventional security issues, and that is my personal thoughts and little hope.
그래서 만약에 이 개념을 가지고 우리가
So with this concept, might be easier for us to seek a paradigm for inter-Korean relations while improving the quality of life for both citizens from in both Koreas. So here our focus should be the harmonization with with ecology on the Korean Peninsula, and that is also the shared agenda that we should share with North Korea. Then we should be able to think out of the box, and if we can apply this concept, we can go beyond just a stable peace, and we can realize the proactive peace. To sum up, we have the nuclearization issues of North Korea, and everything is uncertain and unclear in terms of the peaceful dialogue between the two Koreas. So this biotic community concept could be very ideal or vague or even abstract. However, there are some global pending issues like climate changes and the COVID-19 pandemic, and they are unprecedented challenges that we had. So that means that we cannot solve this problem with the existing solutions and our perspectives. Therefore, the suggestion of this ideal concept of the biotic community may help to seek a new paradigm for inter-Korean relations. Thank you.
박사님,
Thank you very much, Professor.
지금
So you talked about peace in the Korean Peninsula and our views from the North perspective and the South perspective. So you talk about we have to think about the two things as well, and a new paradigm of coexistence in the Korean Peninsula, and you mentioned the biotic community in the Korean Peninsula. So that was a suggestion, and thank you again for our presenters. Now we will do our discussion. We have 4 discussants. So please keep your time limit, make it shorter than 7 minutes. So first, I would like to invite Professor Lee Woo-young for his discussion points.
북한
As introduced, my name is Lee Woo-young from University of North Korean Studies. Thank you. That was very meaningful for us. And I want to take some of my points and some brief questions as well. To Professor Zhang, that was very interesting for me because I'm no professional for international politics, so some questions I want to pose. So there was this Ukraine war, and the impact goes over the globe. And we call that a global transition, but I want to ask how the Ukrainian war affected North Korea and its South Korea policy, and how it will in the future. So I want to hear from Professor Zhang. And another question, China point of view, and you mentioned Chinese point of view, and I appreciate that. And you criticize Yoon Suk-yeol administrations, and you also mentioned that they would not tolerate that. It was your words. So what if? So I'm not talking about whether it's good or not, but according to what you have said, from the China perspective, they are not happy with that. And you even mentioned again, they wouldn't tolerate. Then how can China break these kind of policy of Republic of Korea? This North Korea policy or US policy, is there any break that China has? So maybe you can explain a little bit more.
좀 집중적으로 좀 더.
And then I want to question Dr. Lee's presentation. So what Professor Lee has mentioned was related to post-COVID effect. And again, that goes around the globe and for us again and inter-Korean relationships. And I agree most of that view. But I want to elaborate a little bit further. So during this post-COVID era, I agree that there will be a new paradigm for inter-Korean relationships, but more concretely, so which part of the post-COVID era calls for a new paradigm? Because personal security or biotic community, we had that before. There were some dialogue. So maybe we can do that even without the post-COVID dialogues as well. So maybe you can go a little bit further on this issue. And again, there has to be a new recognition for the inter-Korean relationships. But when we look at the past, all the post-COVID thing and other things as well, the conventional unification dialogue, why it lost its persuasion, we have to think about that. There were change in the Republic of Korea, digitalization, and again, you mentioned the declining ethnicity issue. Then we're talking about globalization, the pan-global situation. That might be a reason for that. And more than that, the post-COVID era, there's a limitation of say like human touch. So maybe we have to address that. Then we can talk about our new recognition. So the conventional dialogue, when we think about that, we need to have more concrete analysis of these dialogues. But I mean, there's this old unification, big win theory, and we have to look upon that as well. We have to come up with some new dialogues as well. And some unification theories as well. So the Kim Yo-jong dialogue actually was there. And rather than looking at some harsh words, because Kim Yo-jong has the second highest level politician in North Korea, she mentioned that we have to go our own ways. So North Korea is talking about two nations. So when we look at this further, so after this low-level federation thing, the unification dialogue has changed a lot. So maybe that is something that we have to look upon. And we have to have some kind of stems for a new kind of paradigm or new kind of security dialogues as well. And other things as well, the provocation. So from our point of view, everything that North Korea does is seen as provocation. But that is, again, changing. But after the Kim Jong-un regime, again, it's not about the words. The provocation, the way of provocation is actually changing. And we have the September 19th military agreement, but some provocation are less than before. So we have to look at this also. Then we can come up with new dialogues in the future. And the discourse in nation and discourse in ethnicity is again something that we have to think upon. So ethnicity is not something that we can dump, but it's not something we can pursue either. We have some kind of hesitation to talk about the ethnicity. So again, that is something we have to think about. And finally, you mentioned the peace first and unification later theory. That is very interesting. I am calling this interesting because each parties want peace first. South Korea and North Korea as well. They want peace first. Then, if both parties want peace, then why should there be conflict? So maybe you want to elaborate on this issue further. So that is all I want to say. Thank you very much for listening.
두 분 발표자
Thank you very much. Such a wonderful comment on both presentations. Now I will move to Dr. Lee Gi-dong for his discussion. Can you hear me? Great to meet you all. My name is Lee Gi-dong. Thank you very much for inviting me. I am from Institute for National Security Strategy. I want to focus on Professor Chang's presentation. He had an interesting comparison and metaphor. He talked about two Koreas like the game Go. And if you think about the game, you think about the actual game and the game players. And that's probably what North Korea refers to themselves. They once had a discourse of the strategic nation, and I believe that Professor Jang tried to explain that concept of a strategic nation that North Korea suggested through his metaphor. Strategic nation that the North Korea suggested is nothing to do about the national capability to become a state. Or is it just their discourse or some kind of a hype that they have? I believe the case is for the later one. So because to become a strategic nation, you have to be equipped with strong national defense power. I am sure North Korea has that military capability. If you look at the details of recent Kim Jong-un's address, he even mentioned about some missions that they have as a nuclear state. And they announced that they should be able to implement nuclear doctrine. And next is the economic power. And I don't have to mention about that economic power of North Korea because everyone is well aware of that. Next is the diplomatic power. In terms of diplomatic power, North Korea has a very strong triangular relations with Russia and China, and they focus on all their capability in this triangular trilateral relations with China and Russia. However, to North Korea, they also have some challenges arising from the trilateral relations. North Korea hasn't carried out the seventh nuclear tests. They do need a seventh test to minimize and simplify their nuclear weapons and make it light. So in order to achieve their goal, they do need the seventh nuclear test, but they have some excuses to delay the seventh nuclear test. I believe it's because of the Chinese influence. What does that mean? In the trilateral relations, that means that North Korea is somehow tied up to China and Russia. Sometimes China and Russia have some opponent ideas against to North Korea. Then the North Korea could see that as challenges of a nation. So within the trilateral framework, the most loose linkage is between China and Russia. They do not share a lot of values. They only have the major shared value, which is anti-Americanism. And their relation is rather strategic. They're not based on blooded brotherhood. So there's a higher chance that the China and Russia go their own ways later. And that means that trilateral relations among China, North Korea, and Russia will collapse. So that means that North Korea is still embracing a lot of risks by having favorable relations with China and Russia. So somehow, this trilateral relations may not be always favorable for North Korea. So except military power and national defense capability, North Korea is not yet enough to become a strategic state as they declared. So my question goes to Professor Chung. Recently, North Korea has pursued the legislations regarding this strategic nation. I'm curious about what Professor Chung's take on that. And I also have a question. He mentioned that North Korea is paying attention to U.S.-China relations, and in that conflict framework, is there any possibility that North Korea will change their stance? I can share my opinion. However, I may have to stop right here. So I just would like to ask these two questions to Professor Chung. Thank you, Dr. Lee.
특히 이제 정계영 교수님 발표와
You gave us some important comments and question of what Professor Zhang has said. Next, I want to call Professor Kim Gap-sik. Good afternoon. I'm Kim Gap-sik from Korea Institute for National Unification. I will pose some brief questions to Professor Zhang. So before everything, North Korea's South Korea policy, the keyword is, after, especially in 2019 summer, was peace through power. And the changed demand of the times, the new South Korea policy and the new two Koreas policy. So actually, in these keywords, there is the new South Korea relation of North Korea. So after the Yoon administration, North Korea wants to go back to the Cold War era, and they want to have this benefit from Russia-Ukrainian war and the China-US relationship. So they want to have this benefit from the new Cold War and place themselves as a nuclear power state. I believe that's the basis of current North Korea policy. So that might go worse or not if not the North Korea policy of U.S. and Korea changes dramatically. If not, then North Korea will continue their dialogues like that. So I want to pose some questions to Professor Zhang, the Chinese point of view. So Kim Jong-un actually mentioned that vaccination will be done in North Korea in October, and from China's perspective, what is the outlook? What is the outlook on this vaccination of North Korea? We believe that the vaccines will come from China and Russia. What is your outlook on that? What is your perspective? So that's a humanitarian aid. So in some sense, the vaccination will be provided, but that might worsen the situation. So maybe North Korea would want to use that to strengthen their ties to China and Russia. So that might be a gloomy outlook. So I want to know your perspective on this issue. Second, so you said the North Korean issue is not a special issue anymore, it's a normal issue. So the North Korean nuclear issue should not be discussed anymore. So then the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, is it forever gone? What does China think about the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula? So does China's perspective change on this issue? So maybe you can elaborate on that further. Of course, just like what Kim Jong-un has said, he mentioned that everything has to change before North Korea's nuclear policy change. So again, so the inter-Korean ties and the U.S.-North Korea ties is deteriorating, and there's a risk for a new Cold War. So maybe the six-party talks, is that even possible in the future? So say if there is a six-party talk, then how effective would it be? I want to know what Professor Zhang thinks about this issue. Thank you very much.
토론 감사드립니다.
Thank you, Dr. Kim. Kim also pointed out that some nuclear related policies and brought questions to Professor Chung. Next, I would like to invite research fellow Jang Cheol-un for his discussion. Dr. Chung is connected on Zoom. Please go ahead. Thank you. I just wish that I could meet you in person, but right now I'm connected online. Thank you for the opportunity and sorry for that. Thank you, Professor Chung. It was an interesting presentation. And in the past, I met Professor Chung, and I am a good friend of him, and it was a great and interesting presentation. Dr. Lee Woo-young, Lee Ki-dong, and Dr. Kim also pointed out some shared values and comments that I had, and I had additional questions to Professor Chung. So I think similar question came from Dr. Lee Woo-young. There are two possibilities. Between US-China and between Korea and China, you should think about the relations separately, or North Korea can play the role to make China and US apart and Korea and China apart. And regarding the North Korean policy, I don't think it's a reasonable thought. And so if North Korea wants to make China and US apart, I'm not sure if they are capable to do so. In particular, between US and China, all areas get involved, like where North Korea is not able to roll out its capability. Maybe North Korea could be the factor to deteriorate the US-China relations further, not the other way around. Another way to put this is North Korea really capable to deteriorate the US-China relations? Some say denuclearization can be realized only through the collaboration between the US and China. So that's why I want to clarify what Professor Chung meant by North Korea trying to make US and China apart. And other panelists' points were shared through my research, so it was interesting to listen to others. And I want to add one more. COVID-19 accelerated inter-Korean relations to be worsened, according to Dr. Lee Moo-chol in his presentation, and I fully agree. However, it is just too much that the COVID-19 can be a cause for everything. So you also just mentioned about climate change regarding conventional and unconventional security. So COVID-19 and climate change are slightly different to impact the paradigm between the two Koreans. And that wraps up my discussion. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chang, for your discussion. That wraps up two presentations and some talking points from our panel discussants, and we have about 10 minutes, and I do want to collect some questions from the floor, if you have any. If you have any questions, we can take one or two questions. And make sure to make your question very short for our time management. Anyone has a question?
한 분 계신데요. 예. 다만 조금 짧게 부탁.
Again, please make it short.
My name is Moritz Eichhorn. I come from Berlin, Germany, work for the Berliner Zeitung. And I don't know if this pertains exactly to what you were talking about, but I'd be interested to know how Korean perspectives on reunification in Korea have changed given the experience that Germany has had for the past 30 years with our unification and the deep divide that we currently have in our country between East and West. Thank you.
네, 그 독일의
Yes, you mentioned how we can compare Germany and Korea, the both countries' unification. If we have another question, please go on.
네, 그럼 없으시면
Okay, I see there is none. Okay, back to our two presenters. We have about 10 minutes left, I guess. So I need time to finish the session. Again, may our panelists use about 4 minutes. Please use 4 minutes. There were many questions, but you can ask these questions and comments. Of course, there were a lot of questions. I know it will be hard for you to answer all the questions, so just keep your time and just answer to the questions you can. So I want to pass the microphone to Professor Zhang.
이게 많은
Thank you very much. There were a lot of questions and there were good questions. Thank you again. Professor Lee asked about the Ukrainian war and how there was some fluctuation because of that. So what North Korea is thinking is that Ukraine gave up the nuclear weapon And after that, that changed their ties because of that, because giving up of the nuclear weapon. So internally and externally, North Korea might think there was some systemic things externally, and they changed their perception of this peace from North Korean point of view, and they are aware of that situation. And North Korea-South Korea policy has changed a lot because of the Ukraine war. So Ukraine used to confront Russia a lot, didn't confront Russia a lot. So they think that is the reason for that. So North Korea would think that that they will have to part ways with Korea, the two separate ways.
정부의 그런
And second, they would not tolerate South Korea's administration's U.S. policy. So actually, I used the word tolerate. Actually, I told my Korean pupil to actually translate that. What I wanted to say is that they are not feeling good, and that China would try to change South Korea's policy. So I used the word intolerate, so maybe that was a little bit misleading. Second, from questions from Professor Lee Gi-dong, you mentioned about transition from a Go stone to a Go player. You mentioned that. And again, when we look back at the Cold War, North Korea wanted to be a driver, wanted to be a catalyst. So Kim Jong-un actually learned a lot from Kim Jong-il. And so without even the actual power, North Korea has the nuclear power, and they can actually become a driver between Russia and US. So North Korea is actually thinking that they have the power to do that. And actually, there's been the two separate countries in the eastern Ukraine. So North Korea maybe think it's part of that. And China-Russia relationships and North Korea to US relationships, they can also do some economic cooperation, but other than that, there won't be any much chance for other cooperations and maybe there's some possibility to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, and how to do that, then both the countries will have to go into a new type of dialogue. And what Professor Kim has asks about the vaccine, if we look back at 2020, there was a vaccine collaboration between North Korea and China. And because of North Korea's internal reason, that didn't go well. And there was a hiatus, and then just it disappeared. And now we have China's vaccine. It went into a lot of tests. So I believe that North Korea is more accepting China's vaccine than before. So I believe there's a possibility in the future. So that is what I think. Secondly, the North Korea's nuclear issue, because North Korea declared itself as a nuclear power state officially. Of course, denuclearization would be harder than before. So in the future, it's my personal view. So the denuclearization issue, there was a step-by-step approach in the past, but now we have to think about what benefit we can give North Korea for their nuclearization steps. You mentioned six-party talks. So yes, that might work. But we need to have more core countries. So maybe trilateral or even bilateral talks would be more likely to happen. For example, China, US, North Korea, or two Koreas and China or US. So we're now in a quite dire situation. So for even small steps, we will have to think about these as well. And what Professor Zhang has asked, I already mentioned that North Korea, when it comes from a strategic point of view, North Korea always wanted to do this kind of policies, and these were actually able to succeed. So actually, again, North Korea thinks itself as a driver between China and Russia. So in the future, even between China and the US, North Korea would think that it can help China and help China with its ties to the US. So North Korea would think that it can act as a driver for China. And this is what North Korea thinks, I guess. So that was my answers. Thank you very much.
네, 정계현 교수님.
Thank you, Professor Chong. Next, I would like to move to Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee Woo-young and other panelists mentioned a lot of things. And to answer Dr. Lee Woo-young's comment, I also pay attention to Kim Yo-jong's comment recently. And the exact quotation is that let's not mind each other's business, and let's move apart, and let's just live like strangers to each other. So Dr. Chang and I had a conversation before, and one time we realized that Kim Jong-un also mentioned something similar as to what Kim Yo-jong said. I think one of the military events that Kim Jong-un also mentioned that the new president is now on the cutting board, which is the most dangerous places, and maybe that new president has to use the brain more. And best scenario would be that you just don't talk to us. And that was the Kim Jong-un's comment. And I believe that that has the same context as what Kim Yo-jong mentioned, his own sister. So any kinds of power conflicts and regarding other situations, I'm not sure if that's possible to let each other just go each other's own way. And as Dr. Chang mentioned, climate change is something that a country cannot solve, and I'm not sure whether it's their true mind or what they have there in mind, or they believe that we need some collaboration, but they just try to ignore the potential cooperation. I'm not sure whether people understand why we try to help and to provide a support to North Korea. That is why I kept mentioning about biotic community. Our community is not just the physical combination of the two Koreas. I am afraid that whether I can further develop this concept of a biotic community. However, I just wanted to focus on the organic parts that the inter-Koreas can share. So in the past, our relations was like one side is the goodwill and the other side is the badwill, and whatever we do is justified and whatever they do is unjustified, and that kind of framework wouldn't work anymore. It can't even solve the current problems, and it won't solve any problems in the future either. So I suggested, once again, please don't get misunderstood that this is different. This concept is different from Community for Life presented by former President Moon. Well, my concept still has a long way to go to make it up better. However, I just want to develop this idea. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your closing remarks. Inter-Korean relation is not favorable, as mentioned, and we have uncertainty and instability on the Korean peninsula, and there might be some more tensions even in the future. And that is why I believe that our discussion and discourse could be an opportunity. It doesn't have to be a definite turning point. However, at least it provides some venue for understanding better for where we are now, and it was a good opportunity to share each other's perspective. Also, based on our understanding about that current situation, we can utilize this understanding to move forward with North Korea for healthier and sound future with North Korea, I believe. And that will wrap up our session under the topic of seeking a paradigm for inter-Korean relations of a coexistence and cooperation. I would like to thank all the presenters, panelists, and all the audience online and offline. My thanks go to all. Thank you. Good evening.
그럼 이것으로 세션을 마치겠습니다. 자리에 함께 해주신 여러분 감사드립니다.